Dad demanded. Where's your car? I told him my husband took my keys to control me. Can you even begin to imagine what it feels like to be walking down the shoulder of a roaring highway, clinging to your 2-year-old son, utterly terrified because the man you married just stole your car and left you to fend for yourself? That was me. That was my life. And let me tell you, what happened next was a confrontation I'd been planning for months. The screech of tires ripped through the air, and my heart leaped into my throat. My father's black SUV slammed to a halt right in front of us. He practically leaped out, his face etched with a fury I hadn't seen in years, eyes scanning the empty road behind me. Madison, where is your car? He roared, his voice barely cutting through the highway scream. I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I finally spoke the truth. Austin took my keys, I said, my voice shaking but clear. He says I'm medically unfit to drive. The silence inside my father's SUV was heavy, suffocating. A stark, brutal contrast to the violent roar of the highway we'd just escaped. The AC blasted against my face, drying the salt of sweat on my skin, but doing absolutely nothing for the ice-cold knot tightening in my stomach. Liam, my little boy, had fallen asleep instantly in his car seat, lulled by the engine's rhythmic vibration. I looked at his small, peaceful face, and my hands started to shake. The adrenaline was beginning its slow, brutal crash. My father didn't look at me. His eyes were locked on the road, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles were bone white. This wasn't my dad asking. This was the retired high court judge, cross-examining a witness. How long, Madison? He asked, his voice low, dangerous, an almost imperceptible tremor. 6 months, I whispered, the words like shards of glass in my throat. Since Liam turned 18 months. I saw my father take a sharp, ragged breath. But I didn't cry. I didn't ask for a tissue or a hug. Sadness? That was a luxury I'd liquidated months ago. Instead, I reached deep into Liam's diaper bag, shoving aside wipes and spare onesies until my fingers found the cool, metallic edge of an old tablet. An outdated device Austin just assumed was broken, buried under a mountain of baby gear he never bothered to touch. This was my secret backdoor, my quiet rebellion. For months, while they were systematically telling me my brain was broken, I'd been quietly auditing the damage. I didn't dare use my hospital email. That would be a breach of protocol.
No.
Instead, I logged into an old, encrypted personal account I'd set up years ago and never, ever shared with him. I'd used it to reroute every bank alert, every password reset. My fingers flew across the screen with clinical precision. I wasn't just resetting passwords for my retirement fund and my private insurance. I was reclaiming my entire sovereignty. My anger wasn't a scream anymore. It was a line-item veto. For years, I'd been the silent investor in Austin and Stephanie's twisted version of a perfect family. Now I was finally checking the balance sheet. And it hit me. My love hadn't been a bond. It had been a high-interest subscription. And they had overdrafted my compassion until I was absolutely bankrupt. What are you doing? My father asked, glancing at the glowing screen in my lap. Accounting, Dad. I replied, my voice steadier than it had been in a year. This isn't a breakdown. This is a foreclosure. I hit confirm on the final password change, and the tablet glowed with a different kind of sunrise, one made of cold facts and lethal numbers. I wasn't running away. I was going back to take delivery of what belonged to me. I needed him to understand the mechanics of the trap. It's the boiling frog, Dad. You know the story. If you drop a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in cool water and turn the heat up slowly, it cooks to death before it even realizes it's dying. That was my life. For the last 6 months. It didn't start with a lock on the door or a raised fist. No, it started with a casserole. With Stephanie showing up at my kitchen island, a bowl of nutritional soup in her hands, telling me I looked exhausted and that I should just let her take the night shift with Liam. I was a pediatric nurse, working double shifts, coming home to a teething toddler. I was exhausted. So I let her. I thought I was being supported. I didn't realize I was being occupied. See, This is the trap of normalized cruelty. They use performative care as a Trojan horse to breach your boundaries. First, Stephanie was in my kitchen every morning, criticizing the nutritional value of Liam's oatmeal. Then she was checking my grocery receipts, circling items she deemed wasteful. When I dared to complain, Austin didn't defend me. He just looked at me with that clinical pity, told me I was being ungrateful, said I had postpartum anxiety, medical issues that made me irrational. Then came the watch. Austin presented it as a gift, a high-end smartwatch to monitor my heart rate and sleep patterns. He said he was worried about my health. But that heart rate monitor was just a front for the position tracking software he used to monitor my location 24 hours a day. The spending alerts he set up? Just a way to ensure every cent of my salary went exactly where he wanted it. My entire life became a series of push notifications and data points on his tablet. My father's jaw tightened as I spoke. He asked if any doctor had ever confirmed these diagnoses. The only doctor in that house, Dad, I told him, was Austin's ego. Every night, Austin would read my texts under the guise of making sure I wasn't doom scrolling, claiming it was bad for my mental health. But I knew the truth. He was reading my thoughts, isolating me from my friends, ensuring I had no one left to call. I knew people would ask, "Why didn't you just leave sooner? Why didn't you scream for help when the water started to simmer?" But they don't understand the invisible chain of a survivor. You don't yank against the chain when you're being held hostage. That just chokes you harder. I wasn't staying because I was weak or because I believed their lies. Oh no. I was staying as a watchman. I was picking the lock while they were sleeping. I was waiting for the exact second I could walk out with Liam and know they could never, ever touch him again. The light in my father's eyes changed. He wasn't just hearing a story anymore. He was witnessing the tactical map of a war I'd been fighting alone. My silence wasn't submission, Dad, I told him. It was the sound of me gathering ammunition. Today, the water finally reached a boil. And I was the one who turned off the stove. The tires of my father's SUV crunched on the pristine gravel of the driveway at the Oaks. It was a silent fortress of beige stucco and wrought iron. A place designed to look perfect from the street, while rot festered within its walls. My father killed the engine, but neither of us moved for a long moment. Through the windshield, I saw them, Austin and Stephanie, lounging on the patio, looking like a scene straight out of an architectural magazine. Stephanie was laughing, swirling a glass of white wine, while Austin sat there with his tablet, looking exactly like the successful financial advisor he pretended to be. They looked like people who had not just forced a mother and her 2-year-old child to walk miles on the shoulder of a dangerous highway. "Stay here," my father said, his voice low, heavy. I ignored him. I unbuckled Liam's car seat, my fingers working the straps with a quiet, trembling efficiency, and pulled my son into my arms. I wasn't staying behind. I walked up the driveway behind my father, matching his heavy, determined stride. Stephanie spotted us first. Her practiced smile didn't drop. It just froze into a brittle mask of false concern. "Oh, look who's back," she called out, her voice bright, hollow. "And she brought reinforcements. Douglas, you're just in time for a glass of Chardonnay." My father didn't even glance at the wine. His gaze fixed on Austin, cold and immovable as a mountain. "Where are her keys and her passport?" he asked. His voice was that low, dangerous rumble he used on the bench, the one that made lawyers sweat when he caught them lying. Austin puffed up, smoothing his expensive polo shirt, trying to match my father's height, but failing miserably. "Douglas, let's not be dramatic," he used, his tone dripping with practiced condescension. "We were worried about her. Madison has been very unstable lately. You know how new moms get. Postpartum anxiety can make them so scattered. We took the keys for her own safety. We're just protecting her." The casual misogyny made my skin crawl, but I didn't break. I would not give them the emotional reaction they were baiting me for. I stepped out from behind my father's broad shoulders. "I am not unstable, Austin," I said, my voice cutting through his lies. "I am leaving." Stephanie let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. "Leaving? Where are you going to go, Madison?" You don't have a job. You don't have a car. You barely have a brain cell left that's not focused on diapers. We're the ones keeping this family together because you are clearly incapable of doing it yourself. My father stepped between us, his presence a physical barrier of pure, unadulterated justice. You are not protecting her, he said, his voice low and terrifyingly steady. You are holding her hostage. Give her the keys and the documents now. No, Austin snarled, crossing his arms, jutting out his chin. You're just a retired judge, Douglas. In this house, I make the rules. I am the law here. If she wants to leave, she can walk. But she is not taking my son anywhere. If she tries, I'll call the police and have her committed for a 72-hour mental health evaluation. I've been keeping a diary of her erratic behavior for months. I'll make sure she never sees that boy again. He leaned in, his voice a low hiss. I've already spoken to Dr. Miller. He's willing to sign an affidavit stating you're a danger to yourself. One call, and I'll have you on a 72-hour psychiatric hold before you can even find a lawyer. The villain's escalation was complete. They weren't just stealing my life anymore. They were threatening to erase my motherhood itself. But Austin was so utterly focused on the rules he thought he controlled, he didn't realize I had already completed the total audit of his crimes. My father didn't resort to violence. He stood in the center of that grand foyer like a silent, unyielding statue of justice, cold and completely immovable. He didn't shout. He simply recited the law with the same low rumble he used to command a courtroom. He reminded Austin that withholding personal property and restricting a person's movement constituted unlawful restraint. Then he turned to Stephanie, telling her that if she dared lie to a 911 dispatcher about a custody dispute to incite a police response, she would be facing charges for filing a false report. I ran past Austin, dodging his outstretched hand as he tried to grab my shoulder. I raced up the stairs, my heart pounding a jagged, frantic rhythm against my ribs. This house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a crime scene. I tore open the closet door and began shoving clothes into a duffel bag with frantic speed. Liam's onesies, my clinical scrubs, my jeans, anything I could reach. My breath hitched in my throat, but I kept moving. I went straight for the mattress. Stephanie was always too busy inspecting the dust on my baseboards to ever check what was hidden beneath the bed frame. I pulled out the thick manila folder I had been building for months. It contained photos of Austin's bank statements I'd snapped when he left his laptop open, screenshots of texts between him and his mother discussing how to manage me. I wasn't just surviving. I was gathering ammunition. My father remained a statue in the doorway, his back to me, acting as a physical barrier between me and the people who had slowly dismantled my life. He told me later that he'd seen the light going out in my eyes 6 months ago, but he'd mistakenly thought he was respecting my boundaries by giving me space. He realized now he had left me behind enemy lines, without a weapon. As I reached the bottom of the stairs with my son in my arms, I didn't glance at the kitchen where I'd cried over burnt toast. I didn't look at Austin's gaping disbelief. I walked straight to the patio table and dropped a single sheet of paper in front of Stephanie. My SUV, I said, my voice clinical, completely devoid of the instability they'd tried to label me with. The $25,000 vehicle my father bought me when Liam was born. You sold it 3 weeks ago, didn't you, Austin? He'd manipulated me into signing a joint title months ago, using the word, or between our names, which legally allowed him to liquidate the asset without my secondary signature. The bill of sale was dated the day after he took my keys. He didn't sell it for the family. He sold a gift given to his wife to pay off a credit card that belonged to Stephanie. This was the reality of their classy life. It was the illusion of power from an empty wallet. Stephanie's business had collapsed, and they were using my assets, my credit, to maintain a facade of wealth they no longer possessed. They were parasites. They thought they could bankrupt me to keep themselves afloat. Their position wasn't earned. It was a luxury they had been overdrafting from my life for years. I walked out the front door and into the blinding afternoon sun. The air out here didn't taste like their perfume and manipulative lies. It tasted like oxygen. Pure, blessed oxygen. I got into my father's SUV, and as we crunched over the pristine gravel driveway, I didn't look back. The look of shock on Austin's face as we pulled out of the Oaks? Not nearly enough for me. I didn't want a head start. I wanted accountability. Back at my father's house, I sat at the sturdy oak kitchen table and opened the laptop I'd retrieved from my duffel bag. I wasn't looking for digital memories or family photos. I was logging into the cloud-based security system Austin had installed to keep me under his thumb. Austin thought those high-definition cameras and sensitive microphones were his eyes and ears, his tools for the ultimate surveillance. He didn't realize that when you build a panopticon to monitor your wife, you are also, unknowingly, recording your own criminal confession. I clicked through the archive footage from 2 weeks ago, my fingers steady and clinical. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was a balance sheet. I found the timestamp. There they were, Austin and Stephanie, sitting in his home office, surrounded by the leather-bound books and expensive scotch they used to project an image of stability. They weren't talking about my medical instability or their concern for my mental health. They were talking about a signature. My signature. She'll never even look at the paperwork, Austin says on the tape, his voice as casual as if he were discussing the weather. I've already forged her name on the loan documents. The $85,000 from the private lender has already been transferred to your business account, Mom. He'd exploited our shared DocuSign account, using my saved digital signature to bypass the in-person notary requirement with a private lender who was a business associate of his. Someone who didn't care about the legality, only the interest rate. I watched Stephanie nod. The brittle mask of motherly concern replaced by the cold calculation of a predator. And the trust fund? She asks. The $120,000 her grandmother left for the boy's education? It has already been liquidated to cover the interest on your bridge loan, Austin replies, a smirk playing on his lips. He'd exploited his status as the sole trustee, presenting a forged medical letter claiming I was mentally incapacitated. He managed to bypass the bank's oversight for an emergency hardship withdrawal. Madison is too scattered with the baby to notice a missing account. By the time she figures it out, we'll have the firm back on its feet. I hit pause on the video, his smirking face frozen on the screen. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single ounce of regret for the man I had married. But there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown of a marriage. It was a felony fraud investigation. I had been the silent investor in their twisted version of family, and now I was pulling my capital. I looked over at my father, who stood by the window, his expression a mask of judicial frost. It hit me then. If Douglas hadn't been there to pull me off that gravel shoulder, the world would have been a very different place. Without him, Austin would have finished his game. I would have been a financial ghost, buried under $85,000 of debt I never signed for. And my son would have been a pawn in a bankruptcy case he could never win. They would have finished cooking the frog until there was nothing left but bones. That's the kill shot, Dad, I said, my voice factual, lethal. He built a cage to watch me, but he actually built the evidence locker for his own trial. I wasn't just surviving anymore. My laptop glowed with the only kind of sunrise that mattered, the kind made of cold numbers and undeniable retribution. Austin and Stephanie didn't wait long. They arrived at my father's house an hour later, their imported sedan sliding to a halt with a desperation that mirrored my own from just a few months ago. Through the living room window, I watched them climb out. Austin was still in his polo shirt, but he looked frayed, his face a mask of sweating arrogance. Stephanie was clutching her phone like a weapon, already shouting before she even reached the porch. I didn't hide in the back room. I didn't pull Liam away from the window. I walked to the front door and opened it before they could even knock. My father stood right behind me, a silent, towering presence that acted as a legal and physical firewall. "Give me my son, Madison," Austin barked, trying to push his way past the threshold. "You have 5 seconds before I call the police and report a kidnapping. You're unstable. You're high on whatever those pills are you're taking, and you are not fit to be in the same room as that boy." My father didn't flinch. "Go ahead, Austin. Dial it." In this state, without a standing court order for custody, a biological mother taking her child is a civil matter, not kidnapping. But when they arrive, I'll be handing them the evidence of your wire fraud. Choose your next move very carefully. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice to match his. I simply held out a heavy manila envelope. You're right about the police, Austin, I said, my voice flat, but wrong about the charges. He snatched the envelope, his fingers fumbling with the seal. Stephanie leaned in over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the pages. I watched the blood drain from their faces in real time. It was a beautiful, clinical transformation. Inside were the high-resolution stills from the office camera, the transcripts of the recording where they admitted to the $85,000 forged loan, and the digital trail of the $120,000 they'd siphoned from Liam's trust fund. This isn't a marriage issue anymore, I said, my voice as cold as a surgical blade. This is felony fraud, identity theft, and misappropriation of funds. My father's former colleague is the district attorney, and he's been waiting for a case this airtight for years. Stephanie let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, and wasn't quite a sob. It was the sound of a predator realizing it was caught in its own trap. Madison, please, she whimpered, her brittle confidence shattering into 1,000 jagged pieces.
We can talk about this.
It was for the business. We were going to put it back. The window for talking closed when you took my keys and left me on the side of a highway, I replied. I pulled a second set of documents from behind my back. A unilateral divorce filing and a notarized confession and restitution agreement. You have 5 minutes. Sign every page, or this entire file goes to the prosecutor's office. I don't want your apologies. I want my son's future back, and I want you out of my sight. Austin looked at my father, then back at me. He searched for a weakness, a flicker of the scattered woman he'd spent months creating. He found nothing but a balance sheet that had finally been settled. He sank to his knees on the porch, his hands trembling as he reached for the pen. Stephanie just stood there, her mouth opening and closing in a silence that was finally, blissfully honest. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were only shocked that I had stopped playing the role of the victim. This wasn't revenge. This was a total liquidation of a toxic debt. I watched them sign away their power, page by page, until there was nothing left of the cage they had built for me but the ink on the paper. 3 months later, I locked the door to my own apartment. It's not a fortress of stucco and iron, and there are no high-definition cameras hiding in the crown molding. It's a small, quiet space in Savannah, chosen by me, paid for by me, and guarded only by the peace I've fought so hard to reclaim. I've returned to my work as a pediatric nurse, but I don't walk into the hospital feeling scattered or medically unfit anymore. I walk in with the clarity of someone who has seen the mechanics of a trap and survived it. Austin? He's currently facing trial for multiple counts of felony fraud, identity theft, and the misappropriation of a minor's funds. That digital confession he unknowingly recorded on his own surveillance system? It became the state's primary evidence. I used the recovered assets, the $120,000 returned to Liam's trust fund, and the restitution from the $85,000 forged loan to establish a new foundation. I named it the Eleanor Support Fund, in honor of my mother, to provide legal and financial resources for women trapped in cycles of medical and financial gaslighting. I've come to realize that real justice isn't just about the fire that burns the cage down. It's about what you plant in the ashes. This is the justice of the sower. While Austin and Stephanie spent their lives trying to have the appearance of wealth, I was focused on being someone worthy of Liam's future. By building this fund, I've turned their attempt to bankrupt my soul into a resource that will save hundreds of others. Leaving that life was the hardest thing I have ever done. But I've learned that letting go of toxic bloodlines isn't a failure of loyalty. It is an act of self-preservation. We're taught that family is a contract you can never void. But if that contract requires you to stay small, stay silent, and stay controlled, then it was never a contract of love. It was a prison sentence. If you're listening to this, and you feel like the heat is rising 1 degree at a time, if you feel like your brain is being broken by people who claim to protect you, please listen to me. You're not scattered. You're not unstable. You are a watchman in your own life. You don't have to yank against the chains and let them choke you. You can wait. You can gather your ammunition in the dark. You can pick the lock while the predators are sleeping. Your worth is not a balance sheet for someone else to audit. You don't need anyone's permission to exist fully, to drive your own car, or to own your own narrative. I watch Liam play on the grass now, and for the first time, I don't look over my shoulder. The only monitor in our lives is the sound of his laughter. And that is more than enough surveillance for me. If you found yourself in this story, or if you've ever felt that slow, insidious heat rising around you, please remember, you are the architect of your own exit. Don't stay in the cage just because the bars are made of gold. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to find your own backdoor exit? Or maybe you've had to stand up for yourself against someone who tried to control your narrative. Tell me what you think in the comments below. I really want to know.